Gather round the table for a story of ambition, hubris, and something I like to call creative accounting. Picture this. It's the late 1990s. The internet is still doing that screeching sound as you dial up. Cell phones are the size of bricks, and everyone is freaking out about something called Y2K. Amidst this technological wonderland, a small company in Mississippi is dreaming big. Really big. This is the story of WorldCom, a telecoms titan that tried to take over the world of telecoms, but ended up dialing the wrong number. Yeah. Sorry. Before we dive into this, if you are interested in a longer version of this story, I've done a full documentary which you can watch up here. The link is also in the description below. And while you're down there, why not hit that subscribe and like button? Our saga begins in 1983 with a small company called Long Distance Discount Services, which rolled off the tongue. Enter Bernard "Bernie" Ebbers, a Canadian-born entrepreneur with the business acumen of a seasoned Wall Street executive and the fashion sense of a cowboy, boots and all. Bernie wasn't your typical CEO. A former milkman and high school basketball coach, he stood a towering 6'4" and had a knack for turning modest ventures into booming businesses. In 1985, they made him the CEO of LDDS, the telephone company, not one of those religious groups. And under Bernie's leadership, LDDS began acquiring other small telecom companies faster than you can say, "Can you hear me now?" That is a terrible joke. Why is that in there? By 1995, the company rebranded itself as WorldCom, a name that suggests global domination, or at least that they enjoyed a Mike Myers movie or two. Bernie's strategy was simple. Why build what you can buy? WorldCom went on an acquisition binge that would make a shopaholic blush. They snapped up over 60 companies, including heavy hitters like MFS Communications and UUNet Technology. It was like Pac-Man on pellets, except the pellets were multi-million-dollar companies. The piece de resistance was the 1998 acquisition of MCI Communications, the second largest long-distance phone company in the US. This $37 billion deal was the largest corporate merger in American history at the time. Suddenly, WorldCom wasn't just playing in the big leagues, it was the big leagues. Investors were thrilled. Stock prices soared, and Bernie was hailed as a visionary. It was as if King Midas himself was at the helm, and that is the second time in 2 videos that we've mentioned King Midas, and I'm starting to think somebody needs to be fired. He turned everything he touched into gold. Or in this case, an inflated stock price. As the 90s drew to a close, the dot-com bubble was inflating faster than balloons at a clown convention. Companies with .com in their name were attracting investments like moths to a flame, or perhaps more accurately, like lemmings to a cliff. WorldCom wanted in on the action. In 1999, they announced plans to merge with Sprint in a deal worth over $115 billion. And if successful, it would have created the world's largest telecoms giant. But the deal was blocked by those pesky antitrust regulators, who apparently thought that monopolies were a bad idea. Go figure. Undeterred, Bernie continued to promise Wall Street perpetual growth, but there was a tiny problem. The numbers didn't add up. Revenue growth was slowing, expenses were rising, and the telecoms market was becoming as saturated as a sponge in a bathtub. Seriously, who writes these fucking jokes? Is it me? It better not be. Tell me that wasn't my one. Tell me. Christ. Faced with the unsavory prospect of admitting defeat, or at least admitting that growth was slowing, WorldCom's management decided to get creative. Enter Scott Sullivan, the company's CEO and fiddler of numbers. No, doesn't matter. Together, Bernie and Scott devised a plan to keep the good times rolling, at least on paper. Allegedly made a plan. Allegedly. Important for legal. They began classifying operating expenses as capital expenditure. In simple terms, that's like classifying your electricity bill payment as an investment in future energy reserves. Sure, it sounds fancy, but your accountant and the IRS might have a few simple questions. The accounting sleight of hand allowed WorldCom to inflate its profits by billions. Over a period of several years, they overestimated their earnings by around $11 billion. That's billion with a B, like the B you would put in bollocks when looking at these accounts. Enough to buy a small country, or perhaps a mission to Mars, or the legal fees of a British prince called Andrew. While WorldCom was dazzling investors with its seemingly unstoppable growth, not everyone was convinced, and some analysts began to question the company's unusually high profit margins compared to its competitors. But these concerns were often brushed aside. After all, who wants to spoil the party? The IRS, the SEC, the FBI, doesn't matter. Inside the company, however, not everyone was sipping the Kool-Aid. Cynthia Cooper, the head of internal audit, started noticing some discrepancies, shall we say. Numbers weren't matching up, expenses were mysteriously vanishing, and the financial statements were beginning to look like a work of fiction. Cynthia and her team decided to dig deeper, often working late nights and weekends, sometimes in secret, to avoid tipping off higher ups. It was a corporate thriller, minus the car chases and with more spreadsheets, so it's kind of nothing like a thriller in any sense of the words. In June 2002, the truth came crashing down like a poorly constructed Jenga tower, or like the script for this video. Cynthia's team discovered that WorldCom had been improperly accounting for billions of dollars in expenses, and when confronted, Scott Sullivan tried to explain it away as aggressive accounting, which is akin to the Catholic Church saying that their scandals were light mismanagement. It's a bit like calling a bank robbery an unauthorized withdrawal. Realizing the gravity of the situation and perhaps the impending arrival of federal agents, WorldCom's board acted swiftly. Scott Sullivan was fired, Bernie Ebbers resigned, citing health reasons, because stress-induced legal problems can really take its toll, much like the stress of people not subscribing. The company publicly announced the accounting irregularities, admitting to overstating earnings by $3.8 billion. Investors were shocked, to say the least. The stock price dropped quicker than a Paris Hilton. I'm not doing this again. We're not. It's terrible. It's in poor taste. And it's not even funny, frankly. WorldCom quickly became the poster child for corporate fraud, stealing the spotlight from Enron, which was probably relieved to share the stage, to be fair. The SEC wasted no time and filed civil fraud charges against WorldCom, and the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in July of 2002, making it the largest bankruptcy filing in US history at the time. So, congratulations, I guess. Employees lost their jobs and retirement savings, and investors lost billions. There's no real funny way to say that, so we'll just kind of leave that as is. I guess that goes without saying, really, so this stoppage was kind of pointless. Roll the tape. Public trust in corporate America took a nosedive, as if it was big before then, and it was a corporate apocalypse minus the zombies, although some might argue that corporate liars are a close second anyway. Bernie Ebbers was indicted on charges of conspiracy, securities fraud, and making false statements to regulators. During his trial, Bernie claimed he was unaware of the fraud, insisting he was shocked by the revelations. The jury didn't buy it, perhaps finding it hard to believe that a CEO could be oblivious to $11 billion in discrepancies. In 2005, Bernie Ebbers was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in prison, and at 63, that was essentially a life sentence. Scott Sullivan, who had cooperated with prosecutors, received a 5-year sentence, and other executives faced charges as well, but Bernie became the face of corporate greed gone wild. The WorldCom scandal had far-reaching consequences. It contributed to the creation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, legislation aimed at improving corporate governance and restoring investor confidence. Among other things, it required CEOs and CFOs to personally certify the accuracy of financial statements, because apparently I didn't know wasn't cutting it anymore. Auditing practices were overhauled, internal controls were strengthened, and the role of whistleblowers gained newfound respect. Cynthia Cooper was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2002, along with 2 other whistleblowers, which should really infuriate that, what's his name, Snowden guy, Russia lad, that fella. and it doesn't matter. She probably didn't set out to win awards, but when life gives you lemons, or in this case, massive accounting malpractice, you gotta make lemonade. WorldCom emerged from bankruptcy in 2004 with a new name, MCI Inc., a nod to the company it had acquired earlier, and it was a fresh start, or at least a fresh coat of paint for a tarnished reputation. In 2006, Verizon Communications acquired MCI, integrating its assets and effectively dissolving what was once WorldCom. As for Bernie Ebbers, he served over 13 years of his sentence before being released in 2019 due to health problems, and he passed away in February of 2020, leaving behind a complicated legacy that's still studied in business schools as a cautionary tale. You'd think the downfall of a telecoms giant to accounting fraud would serve as a deterrent to future corporate misdeeds. But then 2008 did still happen, and that happened with the banks. So we've learned nothing. And that, dear audience, is the story of WorldCom, a company that reached for the stars but tripped over its own 56k RJ11 cable. It's one for the nerds. It's a story that reminds us that while numbers may never lie, people generally do. Subscribe.